Thank you, Bonnie. That sounds so much more impressive than it actually is in real life. So, good morning, everyone. And as Reverend Bonnie said, this month we are looking at freedom in a world that works for everyone. And it wasn't said explicitly, but I assume it's because in the month of July, of course, we celebrate the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And also, in American history, there's another document that talks about freedom, and that's the Emancipation Proclamation. And you hear those words, emancipation and independence, and you get that it's about freedom. Oh, wow. But I want to look at the other two words, declaration and proclamation. Those words seem to have a lot more weight to them than the word that we usually use, affirmation. They are words of authority more than the word affirmation is, I think. The closest we can get to that is when an officiating person at a wedding will pronounce, declare, proclaim that the couple is married. And that pronouncement, that proclamation, is what makes them married. The saying of it makes it so. That's what a declaration is. It may take a while, as with the Declaration of Independence or the Emancipation Proclamation, but that saying is what makes it so. In, I think it's How to Use the Science of Mind, and probably other books as well, Ernest Holmes says that the practitioner, that's unlicensed, someone who's praying without a license, an unlicensed practitioner, speaks with authority. And in the Essential Ernest Holmes, there's a part here where Ernest Holmes says, "Let us now consider the four elements that are usually contained in a prayer that works, in thought that is creative." And those four elements, he says, are recognition, identification. The third one he calls declaration. Not affirmation, not something else, but declaration, something where you have the authority to say that this is so. And the fourth one he calls acceptance. Now, for those who have taken classes and have learned about the steps in the spiritual mind treatment, we might see something odd there. Because in the spiritual mind treatment, we're taught that there are 5 steps, and they have different names to them. But Ernest Holmes wasn't concerned so much with formulas or with a rigid doctrine or dogma. He was interested in, well, what works spiritually? And he was free to explore and to change the way he taught something, and even to change what it was he taught. If you look at his works chronologically, you'll see a development in his thought. You'll see an evolution in the way he thought about certain things. For instance, early on, he said, we spiritualize matter. And later on, he said exactly the opposite. He said, we do not spiritualize matter, and we do not materialize spirit. If you look very early, I think it was in 1919, one of his books, he had the old idea for him that probably came from Christian Science of how matter is an illusion and the body is an illusion. Later on, by the time he was writing The Science of Mind, he said, no, we don't say that matter is an illusion, or that body isn't real. And shortly before he died, he even took away any sort of distinction. He said, we do not, it's not as though that there's a spiritual realm up there and a mental realm over here and some sort of material realm down below. No, he says it's all one system. It's all one thing. Because as his thought developed and he realized what non-separation truly means, what the unity of all truly means, there couldn't be any distinction between one and the other, between the spiritual and the mental. So he was free to let his thought grow. He didn't stay stuck in any sort of dogma or any sort of doctrine or formula. Now, whenever I'm up here, I always go to YouTube and look at the messages from the prior weeks, even if I was there, because I might get a different notion, a different idea, take more careful thoughts. So I go to YouTube, and I don't know if I'm the only one that this happens to, but sometimes when I go to YouTube to watch something, I end up watching some other thing, and then some other thing, and then some other thing. So I guess I'm not the only one here. So anyway, I'm watching these videos about mimes, and and they were showing how they do their things, how they do like that one about, you know, being stuck in a box, how they're walking along and suddenly there's this box there that they notice it's even like it has a ceiling and there's walls to it, and they're showing how they do that, and it's very impressive to see how they actually do it. But my mind sort of wandered, and I was thinking, well, what if there was a street mime doing that, and someone who had never seen mimes before, never heard of them, was watching this, and it's like, what's wrong with this person? Why is he doing that? Is there something I'm not seeing? What's going on? And I even thought, well, what if in the middle of doing that, the mime had like a little brain going on, and they suddenly didn't remember that they were just pretending, that they were just making up this box, and you know, they start calling out for help. Help me break this box. You know, I'm stuck in this box here. What would people in the street do? You know, they wouldn't think he's still being a mime because he's talking. You know, and you know, I do wonder if you're doing sign language as a mime, is that still miming or not? You know, it's kind of a Zen question. But anyway, so they take him seriously, but what would they do for him? They couldn't help him break the box because there is no box, right? The best they could do is help him realize that there's no box there, that, you know, look, eventually he might realize, oh, there's no box there. Anyway, I eventually started actually watching the videos I had intended to watch of Reverend Bonnie and Peggy and Cheryl. And I was noticing that all three of them addressed the dilemma of freedom, when one person's freedom may impinge upon another's. Bonnie noted that about all those through history who have believed they had the freedom and the right to exert their power over others. Cheryl, quoting Ernest Holmes, he said, and I'm not going to do my Ernest Holmes, nothing in any part of this cosmic whole could be considered freedom that would destroy the liberty of some other part of it. And of course, Peggy's whole message was about stay in your own lane. I think it was expressed fairly well. I was tracing down this quote that I knew of, but I didn't know where it came from. It came from the Harvard Law Review almost 100 years ago, where the author of the article said, "Your right to swing your arms ends just where the other person's nose begins." And that sort of sums it up fairly well, I think. So as I was listening to Peggy talking about staying in your own lane, I thought, yes, stay in your own lane, but there are a number of people, I think all of us to some extent, are driving under the influence of other people, other people's thoughts, other people's teachings, kind of not so much in our lane as in theirs, sort of tailgating them, trying to stay with them. I know someone who, whenever he would discuss any political issue, whatever, anything that came out of his mouth, I had heard before. I had heard from some pundit on television, some political operative, you know, just somebody who's trying to persuade people. And I realized that if someone were to ask me, well, what does he think about this particular subject? I'd have to say, he doesn't think about it at all. He's just a walking thumb drive for other people's thoughts. And to some extent, I think that's true not just in politics, but in any teaching, anything that we follow to the extent of not thinking for ourselves, we become these walking thumb drives for the things that other people taught, rather than staying in our own lane. Cheryl addressed this in her talk. She said, "We cannot look outside ourselves for the direction of who we are supposed to be. What's our life supposed to look like? Even if we studied with the most enlightened speaker and tried to emulate them, we'd only be a second-rate version of who they were. And this is something that NLP teachers say, the really top ones say a lot. They say, don't try and imitate me. Don't try and do it the way I do it. Find your own way of doing these techniques and of understanding these principles and using them, and in fact, invent new things, rather than just be a second-rate imitation of them. Richard Bandler, the co-founder of NLP, has said, there are a lot of people who are stuck at various stages of my development. And that can be true of any teacher, really, as if they progress and someone just is really enamored of some particular part of their teaching and takes that into themselves. We talk a lot about contacting or becoming your higher self, and that's good. You know, height is a good thing to aspire to. But I think also it's a good idea to contact your broader self, to broaden your vision, to broaden your ideas and your outlook. Robert Anton Wilson has a recommendation for doing that. He says, look at all the things that you habitually read, or I'm going to expand on that, read or watch on television or go to particular websites or podcasts, and any book that you consider to be the book that you're living your life out of, and just put them all on the shelf. Don't watch those websites. Don't go to those websites for 6 months. Don't read those books. Go to those websites, watch those stations, and watch other ones instead. If there's a particular news channel that you always watch, put that on parental block. You know, you can't get to that one. Watch a different one with a different point of view for 6 months. If you have particular ideas about let's say you're an advocate of strong gun control. For 6 months, subscribe to Guns and Ammo magazine or Soldier of Fortune and really try to understand that point of view rather than just discard it. If you're reading a lot of spiritual books, read some of the books like Sam Harris's End of Faith or God is Not Great. Read those books and learn what those other points of view are so that you become your broader self. I'll have to stay with that one, but you won't go back to yours the same way you had it before. You'll have a broader point of view. Become or contact your broader self. Cheryl talked about how when she was a teenager, she said, I thought when you're an adult, you just sort of like know, you know, what you're supposed to do, what everything's supposed to be. She said, like you go to the mailbox one day and find out how it's all supposed to work. And, you know, you don't go to the mailbox one day and find out how it's all supposed to work, but you don't go to your email either, to that thing you're subscribing to where this person has all these great ideas about how you're supposed to live your life. Yeah, some of them are great ideas, and some of them are great ideas for how other people should live their lives, but not necessarily you. If you live your life out of a book, you become as bound as that book is. There's no freedom there. Any book, any teaching, any teacher is fallible. There's no such thing as an inerrant teaching. And so the message before this one was called Free to Question. And that's not just free to ask questions, but free to question, is this so? Does this really how life works for me? Because again, let's say you go to a particular book. It could be Science of Mind. It could be Course in Miracles. It could be the Bible. It could be, Machiavelli's The Prince. It doesn't matter. You can ask yourself, has this always worked for me? Has this particular passage, this particular chapter worked? Does it make sense to me? Is this the way that the world really is? If you start asking questions, those kinds of questions, and being okay with the answer being no, it's contacting your broader self. That's that freedom to be your broader and higher self. Cheryl, again, I'm quoting a lot from Cheryl's this time, others as well. She says, we follow our own knowing, even if it doesn't look anything like what the spiritual master says. And I would say especially watch out for the words always and never in anybody's teaching. Because outside of the field of mathematics, always and never are very rarely true. You can say often, you can say sometimes, most often, every now and then. But once you hear the word always and never, your ears should prick up. In one of the early NLP books, one of the speakers was saying, every generalization is a lie, including this one. Because sometimes always is true. Example, when Reverend Bonnie was here, she was talking toward the end of her message about this call she was on with an insurance company and how, she was being denied something that she should have had. Some coverage, I don't know the details of it, some coverage or some policy or something, and she was trying to straighten that out, and she was getting frustrated, and she was getting angry, and she was trying not to be. She was trying, to be the light and be the love and be all those things that all these teachers say. And Alan Watts has a good thing. If you don't know who Alan Watts was a great spiritual teacher of the 1960s and 70s. This book is called Still the Mind. There are a number of books by him, and nowadays there are a lot of things on YouTube. Apparently he had a television show in maybe the early 60s or even the late 50s. Go out and find out about Alan Watts. You will not be disappointed. And he said this, he wrote this in this book, Still the Mind. We have a funny notion in our heads that truly spiritual people are made of cast iron, that they are not sensitive, so that if you bang them about, it won't affect them. But as the great sixth patriarch of China pointed out, you must learn to distinguish between a living Buddha and a stone Buddha. Because if a Buddha was simply one who was not affected by anything, then lumps of wood and pieces of stone would be Buddhas. His point was that if you think that the greatest ideal in life is to be invulnerable, then you are on your way to becoming geological rather than spiritual. There's this notion that only some of our emotions are the good ones, the right ones, the ones that we should express. But we are endowed with a whole panoply of emotions, and every one of them has its proper context. At the beginning of Reverend Bonnie's message, she said, there is no peace without justice. And she was experiencing what at least seemed like an injustice and trying to find the peace there when there is no peace without justice. Anger or indignation are the proper responses to when you're experiencing injustice. Every one of the emotions that we're endowed with has its proper context. And everyone has its improper context as well. And one of our jobs is to distinguish between them, to know when, yes, you can be the love and be the light and still be angry. But I play with the prepositions a little bit, to be angry about the situation and not necessarily at the person on the other end of the phone. And Bonnie said to me at some point after or before that she was afraid, that she was so worked up that she was afraid she'd be snapping at people after the phone call. And I said, well, tell them, I'm not angry at you, I'm angry near you. Now, I began this message talking about some things of American history. I'm going to end the same way. In January of 1941, of course, the U.S. had not yet entered World War II. That would happen at the end of that year. This was way at the beginning. But the war was certainly raging on at that point in Europe and in Asia. And the world had just come out of a Great Depression where many people had been destitute and suffering a great deal. And Franklin Roosevelt gave his State of the Union address. And toward the end of that address, he expounded, not the right word, but I'll use it, what were later called the Four Freedoms. And here's some of what he said. In the future day, and I'm definitely not going to do a Roosevelt impression. In the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon 4 essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way. And I would say even not to worship God, everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want. To know that you will be fed, that you'll be housed, that you'll have clothing. Freedom from want, everywhere in the world. And the fourth is freedom from fear, everywhere in the world. He goes on, this is no vision of a distant millennium. It is a definite basis for a kind of world. Sounds a lot like freedom in a world that works for everyone, doesn't it? And a kind of world attainable in our time and generation. Now, of course, it was not attained in his time and generation, and has not yet been attained in ours, but it is attainable in our time and generation. That kind of world is the very antithesis of the so-called new order of tyranny, which the dictators seek to create. Of course, the dictators he was speaking of were people like Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Hirohito. But there are dictators around today with the same aims. To that new order, we oppose the greater conception, the moral order. A good society is able to face schemes of world domination and foreign revolutions alike without fear. Since the beginning of our American history, we have been engaged in change, in a perpetual, peaceful revolution. The world order which we seek is the cooperation of free countries working together in a friendly, civilized society. And I would add a world of free individuals within those countries working together in their friendly, civilized societies. Again, sounds a lot like a world that works for everyone. This nation has placed its destiny in the hands and heads and hearts of its millions of free men and women, and its faith in freedom under the guidance of God. Freedom means the supremacy of human rights everywhere. Our support goes to those who struggle to gain those rights and keep them. Our strength is our unity of purpose. And so it is.